Thank you, Sarah. So here we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Pádraig Berry, and I'm the CEO of TTI Success Insights here in Ireland. And on behalf of my co-host, Sarah Turner, the MD of TTI Success Insights in the UK, and our speaker, Dr. Ron Bonstetter, I'd like to welcome you all. I'm sure that you're as excited as I am to hear what Dr. Ron has to say. There's really nothing more interesting, is there, than talking about ourselves and exploring ourselves. But as Dr. Ron said in his text positioning this webinar, imagine being actually able to see your own brain as you make up your mind. Literally observe what's happening in your brain as you make up your mind. So Dr. Ron's going to show us today, I suppose, the state-of-the-art neuroscience methods that expose our neurological decision-making pathways in real time, and what that actually means for all of us. Now, we have over 250 registered participants for today's event, so there's been a lot of interest in this. Ron's favorite topic, Know Thyself, the science of self-awareness. Before we start, if I may, just a few housekeeping issues. May I ask that you direct any questions you have, and we hope you have loads of questions, to the chat box and to my co-host, Sarah Turner. She will sort them out, and we anticipate having about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for a Q&A, and so she will present those questions to Dr. Ron at that point. Also, depending on the level of interest, and we've already had interest expressed in this, we may run another webinar with Dr. Ron in the new year, early in the new year. And if you're interested in that, based on today's presentation, please share with, again, with Sarah, please share in the chat box extensions, if you wish, or elaborations of what's spoken about today that you'd like us to look at in future webinars. You're all muted and your videos are off. And that's because, of course, there's so many people attending. The screen would be overwhelmed if we had all the videos on. So yeah, so use the chat. If you want to communicate with us, use the chat box. So our speaker today is Dr. Ron Bonstetter. Now, Dr. Ron, to all of us who know him, he is the Emeritus Professor of Secondary Science Education at the University of Nebraska. And even more importantly, he's the Senior Vice President of Research and Development at TTI Performance Systems Limited. And I should say at this point that not only is Dr. Ron a gifted scientist, but he is, as you will see in a moment, also a gifted communicator. But in addition, he's a gifted musician. I don't know whether he's planning to grace us with some of his flute playing at the end of today's session. With Dr. Ron, anything could happen. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ron Bonstetter. And Dr. Ron, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, I'll make a couple of introductory comments before I go to a slide presentation, and at which point then I become just a corner of your screen. But at any rate, I am honored to be able to do this. And I have a colleague, Justin Hibbets, that we may interact with a little bit too, and he actually runs the lab. So between the two of us, though, we're going to be sharing some things that I think are sort of fun. And to set the tone there, I'm going to give you some of our background too. So let's get right into the slides and see if I can share and get you to not only see how this fits into your professional life, but frankly, into your personal life and into your understanding of self. Because if there's one takeaway from this thing that's more important than any other, it is that understanding self is maybe one of the most important things we can accomplish in our life as a human. And so with that in mind, we're going to be exposing some of the neurological underpinnings to this concept of self. In the words of my wife, there was a philosophy professor that I used to interact with a great deal. And I took my wife to a dinner with George one time, and she says, I have never met a man who I could see thinking. And so maybe we'll get to the point where we'll actually be able to expose people's thinking. That could be cool. All right, let's get going. So to start with, this knowledge of self, the science of self-awareness. And by the way, behind every decision, I don't have a slide on this, so I'll use that pregnant pause that you were talking about. Every decision we make has an emotional component. So keep that in mind as we go through some of this material. To start with, I want to talk briefly about the goals so I can set the stage of where we're going. First of all, I have to share my personal path to have this make sense. In other words, there has to be a context for what I'm presenting. So I'm going to take the time to present my personal path that led to where we are today. And I think that's an important part. I'm not going to get as carried away as when I worked with Native Americans in Alaska. I had a goal of introductions when I first went up there to work with tribal leaders. The introduction took 4 hours because they had no intention of dealing with the topic until we knew each other. And so we had to know our own personal paths. We're not going to go that far, but keep that in mind. It's pretty neat when you actually know people. The next thing is I'm going to go over the protocols just enough so you can understand the science behind what I'm presenting. As a result of sharing the protocols, I'll be able to then to give you the real world examples that should be some ahas as to what really goes on in the brain and what we're doing. And frankly, if I do my job correctly, we're going to have time for some awesome dialogues. I will also say at this point that at the end, hang in there because I'm going to give you a list of books and some things that I think are well worth your time and energy to pursue. But that, of course, is the bone that I'm hanging at the end. We're not going to give you that right away. So with this in mind, I really do want to emphasize that this has to touch you. Please be open, even though we're remote and this is a virtual presentation. I want you to think about how this really deals with your lived life as we're moving through this material. So as a result of this, I want you to recognize that 1 hour isn't going to touch this topic. But if you want more, you're welcome to go to our TTI site, our research site. And Dustin and I have put together over 100 papers, and especially the peer-reviewed papers I'm excited about, because we're trying our best to have the world community of scholars review this research and give us feedback. I didn't say approve. I said, give us feedback, because it's a constant improvement. It's not one and done, but this is a good site to go to and just learn more about what we do. All right, so the purpose here is to build confidence in the process. I have to share enough that you have confidence. A number of you use these assessments from TTI. And because you're using these assessments, much of what I'm going to do is based on how we're improving the assessments. So I'm going to deal with that. But I have to remind you that this has generic value that goes well beyond just our assessments. But in the process, I want you to walk away with an understanding that we've got your back. And if you really have nothing better to do in life, you can join me on Instagram every day where I put in a coffee design. And I'll admit that my mind was on something else today. So today's design is terrible. But I had other things on my mind. At any rate, Instagram and neuroscience with the CYANTS is sort of a fun site. I have followers. I've actually thought, Nicolette and I have thought about taking a world tour and visiting the coffee shops around the world that follow me. That could be fun. All right. By the way, this book of notes is a slide totally out of place, but it's a reminder that we're going to do it at the end. So let's start with the personal path that I've gone on. Now, I was a science educator and I prepared science teachers. And in 1985, I ended up getting a national award for the outstanding teacher preparation program in the nation. Now that in itself, it sounds like I'm just bragging, but there's a purpose in me sharing this. The purpose is that, first of all, the award was given to me in Washington, D.C. by Carl Sagan, which is sort of cool. I put my wife in the front row so she could get a picture of us, and she did. So there's our picture that she took. And as we were talking about earlier, we have a number of artisans in the group. My wife is not a photographer. She's an awesome artist, but she's not a photographer. So I keep this, because it really is a reminder, but at any rate, this award came back to the university And I was asked then to do a presentation to the faculty as to why I got this award. And frankly, I got the award based on a mindset that's very different. You see, I had undergraduates that were going to be teachers, and I started to realize that I had children that were going to turn around and teach children because they didn't understand themselves. They didn't know who they were, and how can you help others when you don't even know who you are? So I started using my brother's assessments, and I started to figure out that these assessments might help. In fact, Carl Sagan behind the curtain said, hello, I have no idea why I'm giving you this award. Give me your elevator pitch. So I said, it was the first time I'd used the term, and I said, I actually prepare my teachers to understand self. I teach the science of self. And the science of self is where it starts. I don't care even if you're a psychologist or if you're, a counselor that's working with high CEOs, we have to start with understanding self to be effective. So with that in mind, I presented to the faculty, and about 3/4 of the way through, the department chair stands up and he says, this is interesting, but we don't use tarot cards for decision making. And you know what? That's an insult, because I'm using assessments and they're self-reported assessments. And from an academic standpoint, they are suspect because you're telling me who you are. I'm not, going out and collecting data from the world in another setting. And so that day, I have to admit, some of us, I said I would tell you my personal story. I'm sorry to say that most of my life has been led by people telling me I can't do something. I knew these assessments worked, but I had to be able to prove it to academics. And so I set aside that day to make a decision that, I said it on the stage. I said, I think you're right. I need evidence that these are right. And I need to be able to see what the brain's doing to see if it's right. I'm challenging myself to answer your question. I'm not ignoring your question. That was 20 years ago, folks. So the first thing I did is the very next week, I took off and went over to the Omaha Med Center, and I made appointments with department chairs. And I started to interview department chairs and tell them my problem. I need to understand how decisions are made. I need to look in the brain and see what's going on. And I had lovely interactions with a number of departments that all rejected me. Then I ran into a gentleman by the name of Dr. Sangi. And Sanji said, I think we could have a partnership here. My residents don't have a clue how to communicate. You're a teacher educator. If you teach them listening skills and questioning skills, I will teach you how to read EEG. And so we set up this process where I started to work every Tuesday and do grand rounds and then luncheon with the residents and learn how to do video encephalography. In other words, we're watching a video while somebody is having an epileptic seizure, and we're looking at the EEG to make it happen. So I learned the science behind this stuff. That led then to learning the science that I could apply to my question. Are these real? So with that in mind, we started setting up a lab when I moved down here, and there's Dustin that you'll hear from a little later possibly, but he's in the background listening intently. So this is a picture of John here with the NeuroNet on, and actually that's a live image of his brain in real time while he is looking at things. And by the way, well, I'll get into that in a moment. So I want you to know that these are real. I feel comfortable presenting in international settings and neurological settings. I have presented worldwide to neurologists on what we do because we're basing this on real science. Even though Tom looks like he is asleep, Tom Collara has been a wonderful aid in this and a partner. And as a result of working with Tom, we have 2 patents on the process. The patents are there only to prove that we know what we're doing. We have no intention of stopping anyone in the world from doing what we do. I want to share it openly. And I would love to see replicate studies run by any of you and all of you as you move down the road. So with that in mind, we got the patents. And then a year and a half ago, Tom and I were honored again with the Joe Kamiya First Person Science Award. It's an international award given to people that are doing cutting edge research. So I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to say that what I'm about to show you is real. So this is an example of just an EEG that's coming out. This would be what it would look like if you were in a clinic right now and having your head hooked up to collect encephalography. So we have this occurring. What we do then is we literally give people triggers or stimuli. And in the process of having the stimuli on the screen, those green bands is when you're looking at a trigger. And I'm using the word trigger, meaning anything that I want you to focus on as a thought. And so we're able to look at what you're thinking while you're thinking about it in real time. That's what's really cool. I'm going to generalize for a moment. There are three basic outcomes that come out of this. One is rejection. Your brain is going to reject what's on the screen. The trigger causes a rejection. You're upset. And here's what it looks like. The avoidance in this red part, I'm only looking at gamma activity. And if you want more detail on this, go back to that research page and look at our research on gamma. So here we have, and the eyes are looking at you. When I show you these images, the brain is always looking at you. So what you see, that red is on the right side of the brain. And that right side says, ooh, there is a neurological neuronet that's firing. It's gamma activity, which is fast wave activity. And it's saying no. The brain is literally saying no. On the other hand, see, and so it's all really now you're never going to see it quite this clear. I'm giving you examples that are exaggerated, but this isn't a real example. And this is a person who is saying no. Now, as a result of that, we also have sort of a middle ground where the brain is somewhat neutral. And by the way, these are really capturing your emotional load associated with the decision. And I'm going to come back to that again and again. Lastly, we have acceptance, which is really cool. When you have acceptance, look what happened. The red is on the opposite side of the brain. And this is clear in the literature. I'm not doing something that hasn't been done. What we're doing is we're applying this in a real world setting. So you always throw somebody in and we say, I'd like to see your name spelled correctly and incorrectly. 40 years as an academician, I have to tell you, it's a trigger when somebody leaves one N out in my name. So they spell it wrong. It's like I lost a citation. I was on Academia last night and I have 222 citations this year that people, there would have been more if they hadn't left the N out. So what we do is throw this in and we get a correct spelling and they go, yes, that's my name with two N's. And it's left hemisphere flare. We then show people's names misspelled and they go, who's that? What? And it's immediate response. The brain is a pattern seeking organ. And in this case, the pattern didn't work and they get a rejection. I only use this as an example to show you that when we put a trigger up there, we're going to get a real response. So with that in mind, I just want to show you what comes across our screen so that we're not only collecting gamma, we're collecting all of the wavelengths. And the images are called Sloretta Imaging. It's a beautiful process that turns quantitative data into real images. So the quantitative data we also collect. So we actually know quantitatively what's happening in each part of the brain. And actually, for the fun of it, I threw this in. We get about 250,000 data points every second. So it's sort of cool. And people say, oh, I'd like to do that little experiment. I'll come into your lab. We love to have people come in the lab, but we have to have purpose because Dustin takes on average 15 hours to analyze the data from one client because of all the data. It's cool. Okay, basically, this is what happens, folks. I've expanded those three into an 8 continuum so that you start to see that along the way, what we end up with is all the way from a major flare that has an emotional component that's over here, and it represents enthusiasm, and it's really a dominant left hemisphere phenomenon, all the way on a continuum over to rejection. And rejection, of course, is this what's happening over here on the right side of the brain. Let's take a look now at some real world examples. With that in mind, here's one of the first experiments we ran. We gave people our behavior assessment. And in the behavior assessment, one of the first slides, cell, is that you have to rank order these 4 things from most like me to least like me. This is an example of how they answered the questions. By the way, we also collect them answering the question while they're hooked up to EEG. And we get these images. I can match, number one, what you're most like 84% of the time, I can just look at the image and I know what your number 1 was. That's pretty good odds. I don't do as well on 3 and 4, or 2 and 3, but 4 is cool. 4 is almost 100% of the time I can tell you what you're not. And so I go into the literature and I find out evolutionarily, this is how we survive, folks. You know, saber-toothed tiger, you got to know what to avoid. And it's been part of our evolution. And in fact, the brain has literally direct connections to avoidance. It is immediate, it is stronger, and it dominates our decision-making. Avoidance is sort of the status quo. Recognize that and realize that as humans that are able to give serious thought to things, that sometimes you have to rethink things. I'll come back to that as well. So what is cool here is that what we don't want forms the biggest reaction. I love that. And by the way, when you look at how we score our DISC assessment, 3 and 4 is your natural style. It's the real you. When I was explaining this to my brother, I remember saying, you know, if you go out to a new restaurant and you look at the menu, the very first thing, we went out last night with a couple we don't know. I love people that are just open with everything. We don't know this gentleman and his wife. And the menu is handed and the waiter is starting to explain the specials for the night. And immediately this gentleman who I really don't know says, that has green in it. I don't eat green. So I had to think about this. He knows what he wouldn't eat, but he had no clue what he would eat. So that 1 and 2 takes a little longer to decide, but we already know that green's gone. I had to laugh. His wife was upset with him, by the way. Okay, we're also dealing with microstates because we've learned in the literature again, and our processing is based on 125th of a second, because actually your brain is processing at about 1/8 of a second. It's starting to change what it's thinking. This becomes crucial information. Now, this is just a sample that Dustin put together of one of our experiments, but recognize, see the changes over time as that brain is switching back and forth. That's all you need to get out of this, is that 1/8 of a second, stuff's happening in your brain. It's not just one and done. So as a result, you're more than welcome to look at this paper on response processing that tells how we are really looking at your brain while you're responding to questions. And this is a big deal because American Psychological Association says that this is the missing component in self-assessments, and it's no longer missing. But they say, we have no idea what you're thinking when you answer the questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. Psychologists need to catch up with neurologists, or at least communicate with each other. Here we go. So we actually, working with Tom and Dustin and I, have created a 4x4 metrics where we're literally able to identify 16 different styles of processing where you are in this, all the way from no reaction to full reaction, and full dislike and full like or approach. So we've got these 4 corners identified. We are working diligently to identify the others. We have defined them, and we're now trying to quantify when you move from one to the other. We're working on this. It's a work in progress, and I want to show you how this gets applied. And by the way, if you want an article on this, it's published in Clinical EEG, which is an outstanding journal, and we have 2 papers available in there. Now, I want to show you a real example. So here we have a person that said, I can calm myself in tense situations. Cool. And they say they agree with that. They give it a 5 out of a 6. I can calm myself in tense situations. Now, this is a person who's applying for a job. I want you to remember that because context becomes very, very important. So as a result, we collect brain images while he's answering that question. And I'm just going to show you a set here of these to show 8-10 different positions and what happens. The very first thing his brain did is he has a mixed feeling. Okay, yeah, it's sort of, I don't know, it's bad. Do I really calm myself? I don't know. And then he sort of goes neutral. Oh yeah, it's bad. I remember once and I couldn't calm myself. Yeah, but I think it's okay. I mean, sometimes I calm myself. No, that was a bad example. And I wasn't real calm there. And yesterday driving in, I wasn't calm. I don't know. And then he answers, I calm myself. What's wrong with this picture? This is how we're improving our assessments, because what we see here is possibly a socially acceptable response to brain activity. The question's too easy. You know, do you beat your dog? I mean, I don't know, it just isn't going to work. 5 times out of that second and a half, they said no, and yet they answered yes. So these are helping us really improve our assessments. I'm going to show you some other insights. These are the things we've learned from doing what I just shared with you on a larger scale through our assessments. We've learned that many of our questions are awesome. The brain and the question correspond. It's a beautiful thing. We also see some items that have, as we just shared, socially acceptable answers. We also see some questions that are confusing, and their brain's flipping back and forth and doesn't know what to do. We also see that some of our questions originally were written to make sure people were paying attention. It's called a double negative. They're bad questions. Anyone that makes questionnaires knows that double negatives just goof people's thinking up. It doesn't get to where you want to go. And lastly, we've found some neutral reactions. And we're going over this with Dr. Garrick, who is in charge of all of our statistics, and he's a PhD in mathematics. So he knows what he's doing. And he pipes up and he said, the items that you're sharing with me that you're getting a neutral reaction correspond to the items that we have low statistical discrimination. What that means is that we've got internal validity here from 2 different sources, that some of these questions need to be revisited. So we're in constant improvement as a result of some of this stuff, and we can literally see people's brains. In the literature, I want to share briefly something that's really cool. I went back, and Jonathan Haidt is just a cool psychologist. He's got some awesome books. I'm going to share one of them with you at the end, so wait. And in his paper from 2001, this emotional dog and its rational tail, I mean, that sort of creates an image in itself. It's a good read. Here's one of the graphics. Remember, he's not a neurologist. He's a sociologist. So he says they use different vocabulary. We got to get over this use of different vocabulary, folks. We got to get people talking with each other with a common vocabulary, or at least help each other define what we're talking about. Because he talks about an eliciting situation. I call that a trigger. He then talks about it forms an intuition. I'm sorry, that's an emotion. It's a gut feeling. It's an emotion. As a result of this emotion, you make a judgment. What? And then you add reasoning, and you justify and you rationalize what you already decided. That's what he sees when he looks at people's decision-making in a sociological setting. This is exactly what we see in society and our neurology, the socially acceptable answer. The brain says one thing, the reason, the judgment goes another direction. It's going to be fun. We've got to get people to invert that a little bit. And I'm going to talk about how to do that. So we see what we believe rather than believe what we see. I mean, that's one of those double negative. I wouldn't put that on a questionnaire, but I do like the statement. Okay. Now, so here's the bottom line. We have to learn, and this is part of this thinking about thinking, we have to learn that some of us, and by the way, I'm a high D, some of us have to learn to not think with our mouth. We have to stop. We have to refrain. We need to reflect. We need to think, where did that decision come from? Why am I having that decision? Are there alternatives? And should this be thought about a little more before I respond? I think these 3 R's are crucial in our daily lives. Somebody cut me off on the highway, I'm going to cut them off. If they're going around me, I'm going to go around them. Now, reflect on this whole process. Think about what you're really doing, and hold back on judgment. I'll tell you, another key word in this presentation is judgment. If there's a New Year's resolution every of us should have, it is to really think about how we are forming judgments about ourselves and others. I didn't say change them. You better think about them though, because many of them do need to be changed. All right, with this in mind, I want to show you what happens with peer pressure. So now we have not only Jonathan's image of how you make a decision, but what happens when you throw other people into the mix and other people start to influence you. And we're all in little bubbles, by the way. We surround ourselves with like thinking, and sometimes we create like thinking that is good, and sometimes we isolate ourselves into situations where we've ignored real data. With that in mind, I want to take you back to 1974. I'm going to show you 1 minute clip from 1974 in something that talk about peer involvement. Okay, so let's see if I can make this work. By the way, my face is in the way. I had to move it. Here we go.
Experiment is not a public opinion poll. It examines behavior under the pressure of social forces, as the experiment of Solomon Asch reveals.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, or 5th person with a white t-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. But on the 3rd trial, something happens. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Asch found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
All right. By the way, look that up on YouTube. The video is much longer. Whoops, I got to get that off of there. The video is much longer, and there's more information, but the bottom line is 37% of the time people were buying into the group, even though they knew it was wrong. And what's really cool is in that same experiment, they got one other person to agree with the right answer, and number 5 participant all of a sudden then gives the right answer and drops to only 5%. In other words, if you just have one colleague, you can form a new group. Oh, I'll tell you, humans are tribal. We work as groups. It's just wonderful things. So that's a lead into the next topic, team dynamics. You know, I threw this in just because we went over this presentation early in the week and they're going, where'd that slide come from? I added this slide because novelty works for you guys too. And there is no I in team. We've all read that. We've all heard it. We've all been taught that. And I'm going to tell you it's absolutely wrong. And here's why it's wrong. Because team dynamics require, by definition, a group of people that are all bringing new ideas to the forefront. If you didn't need new ideas, why have a team? Just have a boss. So as a result, we have some interesting dynamics going on. Within the team, we've got a continuum again of this emotional load. We have people that are agreeing with you, left hemisphere. We have people that are engaged, but they're not over the top emotional about the issue. You know, they're okay. We have people that are disagreeing, but they're quiet. You can read their nonverbals, but they're not saying much. Then we have people that are really addressing the issues and saying, no, I disagree with it. I have a different point of view. And then, of course, we have the radical that's over the top and overreacting, and the emotional flare that's coming from the temporal zones here. This person's out of control, okay? So these are potential dynamics that are going on. What I'm suggesting is that there's no I in team means that you have to set up a setting and trust that results in these 3 occurring, not these 2. Number 1, if everybody agrees, you're not a team. And number 5, if you've got this going on, there's no trust. And people are emotional. And let's deal now with what that happens with emotional. So in a team, if you want to learn more, start looking for neurosynchrony or mirror neuron coherent states. And both of those topics in the neurological world, that's all they talk about is how this works. You know, I'm an American football watcher, American football. At any rate, when I watch American football, my wife will hesitantly watch with me. And when a tackle occurs, I'm moving with the play. There's a mirror neuron. I can't stop it. I played college football. There's a mirror neuron that just fits in every time it happens. And she's sitting there and nothing's happening. Mirror neurons are real. And we start looking like other people in situations. Even your brain waves are looking the same. It is so cool to just smile and realize what's going on. Yeah, I was in that play. So let's look at what happens with stress. And I'll make this fast. Because of the pandemic, it's more of a topic than ever before. Recognize that a good neural network, a normal network, there's lots of connection, there's lots of coherence, and you're working and making things happen in a great way. On the other hand, stress signals are sent and you start to form a negative component. You become less positive. And it can spread if it's not stopped over time. And it can be activated where it becomes the network. And all of a sudden you have a new network that's active that's negative. It's not positive. Everything you do is negative, and that's not good. And in fact, what happens in the prefrontal cortex is that when you turn negative, the prefrontal cortex starts shutting down and the emotional loads start to dominate and rule. And these numbers are somewhat contrived, but just keep in mind that when you're thinking and everybody's calm, you have alternatives. You can think about possibilities. The world is full of possibilities. And when you're stressed, they limit. It's like black and white. And so we've got to deal with understanding this. Solving it's another issue, but understanding it is step one. We've got to understand what stress does. Stress limits your ability to think well, period. So I want to apply this to a brand new paper that I just had the privilege of reviewing for an international journal. They took groups of people and they had high self-esteem and low self-esteem. And guess what? Number one, the low self-esteem had a negative network. They then had them listen to 5 minutes of affirmations. So they got headphones on, they got the EEG on, and they're listening to this stuff and they're saying, you're a good person. You actually add quality in what you do. You have many strengths that come out. And the high esteem is sitting there going, yeah, that's who I am. There's virtually no emotional load there. It's positive, but it's not over the top. There's less intensity. What happens to the person over here that has low self-esteem? They go, bull, not true, not me. And the more affirmations that come across, the stronger the reaction gets. They just become more negative. And so I want you to think about this in terms of helping a colleague. I want you to think about this as a parent. And you keep giving accolades to these kids and give them a blue ribbon, and they're going, I didn't earn that. That ain't me. So I went to a psychologist last night and I shared this slide and this data from the new paper. And I said, so what would you do? And she said, I encounter this all the time working with CEOs. You know, they hide the fact that they really have low self-esteem. And she said, I start off by forcing them to tell me what they're good at. Wait, you don't tell them what they're good at? No. She said, you don't dare tell them what they're good at. If they can't come up with it, then you got major problems. But you have to start with them. They have to start articulating. Then you can build on that. And you build on their strengths, not on their weaknesses. You do. She said, I do not take my time and work on the one skill that this person is terrible at. I work at building their skills they're good at. I think it's a very important message to make. So managing thought, I just want to briefly point out that we work with some people that are heavy meditators. And we have the privilege of seeing people can control their brain. I don't want to take the time right now to get into this because I want some question and answer. I just want you to tell you that people that are serious meditators literally have control of their brain that is equivalent to an Olympic star and their ability to perform with their muscles. The brain is in many ways a muscle. It's been described as that, and these people can control it. Within 3 breaths, they can literally turn parts of their brain on and off. This shows a person that has got immense focus. They've shut down gamma, they've shut down alpha, and they've increased delta. They're having a conversation with Dustin and I, and yet they're almost asleep. They're relaxed, they're calm. It's sort of exciting to see this stuff. So without self-awareness, folks, we're nothing but puppets. And I don't want to be a puppet. You know, we could get into some interesting conversations about free will, which frankly, I'm sorry to tell you doesn't exist, but that's another topic for a philosophical and maybe a pint of beer. At any rate, our assessments open the door to new personal insights. And we really have an opportunity here to lay out some information that A, has a scientific background to it. It's not contrived. And B, when used in a trusting, loving manner, we can have open dialogue that each of us can grow and continue on the path to be better human beings. I want to now share some sample readings that I just think are exciting. So first of all, triggers. I've talked about triggers. You want to know more about triggers, take a look at this book called Triggers. And if you want to know more about Jonathan Haidt, his Righteous Mind is a pretty good thing to talk about how we're divided politically, at least in the United States and other parts of the world too. So you start to understand how people get embedded in their beliefs, and yet they have no clue where the beliefs come from. They're implicit versus explicit memories. It's cool stuff. I love Suggestible You. You know, when I looked at Suggestible You, I thought, ooh, it's a book that's going to tell me all about placebos being bad. No, placebos are good. Magic is good. You have to believe in what you're doing, and when you believe in it, good things happen. Positive leads to positive, folks. And this is one of my favorite books. Bergman is out of the Netherlands, and it's a relatively new book called Humankind. And number one, it's a book about how we're basically good, and yet the world tells us we're basically bad. And so he points out neurologically how we're good. I love the first chapter that points out that news, by definition, is the exception. If it's not the exception, it's not news. And yet we watch it every night and think it's the gospel. And it leads to people doing crazy things because they're looking at exceptions and making that the rule. And I had a conversation earlier this week with our hosts about people buying up petroleum as if there was none left on earth because of the news. It's the exception, folks. It's not the rule. Anyway, enough on that handbag. Another one is good, keeping score. The body keeps the score. Basil is a good friend of mine, and Basil has an awesome book that just points out that stress really leads to health issues. And we can create our own health issues. And this is a relatively new book, but Fleming's book is awesome. By the way, if you don't want to read all of Fleming's book, I didn't put this in my show notes, but Ginger Campbell has a podcast called Brain Science. And she does interviews. There's 188 interviews of neurologists. The most last 2 Fridays ago, she did with Fleming. And it's 1 hour, you could get everything that's in that book. So if you want that, email me, because let's keep a communication going. This is I'm showing you some continuation here. This is a book that I've just started where he's pointing out we're all connected. We're a web. We're all connected to each other. We're tribal, and we're connected to nature. And we continue to try to separate ourselves from nature, and it ain't working. Now, remember, I'm a scientist. These last 2 books I would not have put up here 10 years ago because, frankly, I wasn't grown up enough to realize the bigger picture in the world. Meditation is real. In this book, Jeff does an awesome job of showing the real science behind meditation and how you can rewire your brain. Now, you can push the envelope a little farther and go to neurodharma. And now it's taking the ancient beliefs of Buddha and applying that to where we see neurology. And it's sort of fun to see these worlds coming together. So anyway, I think that, Sarah, you were going to put that in the chat if people wanted that information. That would be helpful. And oh, by the way, there it is. I stuck it in. There's Ginger Campbell and this brain science podcast. And oh, last Friday, this is a book that I just purchased and I haven't gotten it yet, but man, was that a good interview that came. And the sad part is I purchased the book and I can't get it because for some reason it's only available in the UK, which is irritating. But at any rate, you can get this book right now. I can't, but I got it on back order. Thank you very much. Let's see if we can have some conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ron, for delivering such a fascinating presentation to us all today. I personally could listen to you talk about this for hours, but I know that everybody watching will also have gained lots of insights, and everybody's notebooks are probably full of things to further explore. So thank you again so much for that. I have put the book names that Dr. Ron referenced in his presentation. I've put them in the group chat, so you'll be able to find them there. I think Porg has also put them there, so you've got them twice. But that's fine. Have a look at them and research a bit further. As Porg mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we would really love to try and convince Dr. Ron to present to us again. So if there are topics you'd like to hear, please just drop them into the group chat as well, or you can contact Porg or myself after the meeting and let us know your thoughts. My chat box has been lighting up with lots of questions, which is brilliant. Hopefully we'll have time to go through them. If we don't, I might send them over to Ron and see if he'll answer them, and then we can send them out as a sort of a follow-on after the event if we don't get round to asking them all. So feel free to put them in, because at least then we can do something about them and get you some answers either now or after the event. So let's go and get these questions done. Okay, so the first one is a question from Adam. So on the comment about tarot cards, does this mean that this work that you are doing is a scientific validation of the assessments?
Language is always important, and definitions of language. And validation in a scientific world has at least 5 different definitions of what is meant by validation. This is everything we're showing you. Actually, everything I'm showing you right now, if I were in a room of scholars, we would be talking about the fact that this is high-level correlational data. It is correlational data. And you have to admit that up front, because we don't really know what's going on. We're showing a correlation between a decision and where gamma wave activity is taking place. It's sort of like, what's the nature of the universe? We can describe the universe, but we don't really know the nature of the universe. And so I'm trying to answer the question best I can. I feel abundantly positive about where we are with regard to validity and reliability. I think we're light years ahead of everybody else. I'm also enough of a scientist that I do not believe in dogma. So I can't say yes or no, because it depends on the context, who you're using it with, how it is being used. And actually, there is no umbrella that just says, yes, this is good, no matter where you use it in the world, and it's fine. But I can tell you that I can stand up to any other assessment in this field and feel very, very positive that we know what we're doing.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ron. Brilliant. Okay, so the next question is from Rachel T. Is EQ, emotional intelligence, the foundation of our ability to adapt our behaviors?
Yes. And actually, that's both scary and exciting, because we like to look at behaviors, but recognize behaviors come from something. Let's dig deeper. Let's get to where the cause instead of the symptom. And I'm convinced that EQ starts to expose the cause. And we have to get to that. And we're finding some exciting data in our EQ assessment with regard to really exposing where this stuff comes from.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ron. Okay, so question from Jennifer. On the 84% versus the 100%, so I'm guessing that's talking about the the reliability on the information that you presented. What does the future look like for assessments? Will we get to 100%? Do you envisage a time when assessments will be measured solely in this way? It's a good question.
Okay, short answer is yes. Let's see, today is Thursday. Yesterday, I was on a meeting where we had two companies presenting to Tom Calera and I a new product that is basically a headband that they're trying to interface my research with their headband so that people could take an assessment and answer questions and go straight from looking at a screen to the assessment being filled out. I don't know, we're not there yet. Part of that scares me, but at the same time, I'm enough of a scientist that I want to pursue that and see where it goes. Yeah, so down the road, I would love to start every day putting on my headband and seeing whether I need to reduce beta before going out the door or I'll have a car accident. I think some of this stuff could be very valuable.
That's good. That's exciting. Thank you. Okay, next question is from Mark. What do you feel is the role of the media on group emotions? Oh, you did touch on this a little bit. Is this how panic buying works, for example, which, yes, is very topical at the moment in the UK, Ron?
Yeah, you know, again, I just think it needs to come up in conversation that the definition of news is the exception. It's not news unless it's an exception. If people start to really listen to that, maybe we can get this emotional response to go away. But I'm very concerned with the number of people that don't think enough about thinking. They're puppets and they can be controlled. And one of the major controls right now, I'll tell you, evolutionarily, we have not matured enough for the social sciences that exist at the present time. We really haven't got the maturity to deal with the social outlets that are there that can influence us in ways we never dreamed. It's literally creating demons that have the power to take the masses wherever they want them to go. How scary is that? Recognizing it is step one.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ron. Okay, question from Peter. Excitement had flares in both the left and right side of the brain. So that would be the image that you showed before. Does this back up the thinking in EQ that being too happy can also impact your ability to make good decisions?
Yeah, I didn't stress that enough, but there were 5 images there, and I talked about wanting your team to be in the 3 middle ones because either end are inappropriate. And having too much enthusiasm just shuts down possibilities outside the tangent. You lose the tangent. Being over the top just shuts down everything and you become, obnoxious. But both ends of that spectrum are not necessarily good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you, Ron. Okay, so a question from Julie. Self-esteem, positive parenting, and indeed positive feedback in general, what are the implications?
The implications is that a person has to believe it themselves, and you need to be able to pick up on that in a conversation, whether it is you forcing the concept on somebody or whether they are actually building on a concept that they possess. And you have to start with small building blocks and build from their worldview, not yours. I can give you so many examples. We had an LPGA, a professional lady golfer who came in. We ran a bunch of triggers on her and she created a list. We created a list all the way from, putting to using a 5-iron, all kinds of stuff. The coach is in there with us and I'm debriefing it. And I said, wow, this is interesting. Marking the ball has a huge flair. So tell me about that. And the coach interrupts and he says, she's been griping about that for years, that there's a problem marking the ball. You put a quarter down and you forget it. And I said, I asked her to explain it. And so she says, well, he's right. You just put a quarter down, but you can't really put it down right. You can't put it in the same place. You never put the ball in the same, you don't know. She flares right in front of me. She has an emotional breakdown because once she was criticized of marking the ball incorrectly. And every time she went to put that quarter down, it was a flare. It was a feedback loop. It was post-traumatic stress. And then she was supposed to putt. I'm sorry, those two don't go together.
Ron,
We have to have people do it.
Ron, may I ask you a question? Your talk has been amazing. It's been really, really interesting, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I had heard some of it already, but of course, as usual, you changed it on us. Something strikes me when we coach somebody, when we work with somebody, particularly in the area of EQ, but in general, in all areas, when we work with people using our assessments or not, just working with them in whatever relationship. One of the things we always try and do is come up with strategies or tactics. And you talked there quite a bit about refrain, reflect, and so on and so forth. Can you just elaborate just a little bit for us on techniques? For example, you mentioned meditation as a way of basically grounding yourself and relaxing yourself and allowing the neural pathways to clear, if you wish, of emotion. But when you talk about refrain, reflect, and so on, this moment of choice, can you talk about this moment of choice, this millisecond between the stimulus and the response, this moment of choice? What can one do? What are practical things that one can practice to allow one to become more reflective, so that one can then respond in a more appropriate way?
There's a term in education called wait time. And generally, it's applied. Wait time 1 refers to asking a question and then using a pregnant pause for people to respond before you restate it or answer it yourself. And by the way, in general, people spend less than 3 seconds before they either restate the question or answer it themselves. And so being aware of that starts allowing you to go 10,001 to give a person time to think. Wait time 2 is inverted. When you're flared, you need to be proactive and say, number 1, these are triggers. That was a trigger. I can feel it. I'm flushing. And so then you start using wait time before responding. And you focus on the wait time, which then allows you to start calming yourself. Another strategy is breathing, to literally start doing slow breaths, counting your breaths, focusing attention to something other than being angry or being upset or being confrontational. And those techniques, number 1, recognizing it. Number 2, using something that works for you. Some people use just focusing something positive for a moment in my life. Others use breathing. Others use wait time. All of those things start causing you to refrain before you literally have your brain and your mouth connected.
It's interesting. I watched a seminar, not dissimilar to this actually, by a scientist from TCD, Trinity College Dublin, about a year ago. And it was an amazing talk. You'd love this guy. But he was counseling, he was a psychiatrist, and he was doing some work with somebody and counseling them. And they went, the gentleman was having problems with his relationship. And so he gave him all this counseling, and each time in the counseling session, he'd give him a new strategy, a new tactic, a new whatever. And eventually, after about 6 months of counseling, the guy came in one day and said, yes, he said, I did it, I fixed it, I found the answer, it's all working, things are great. And the professor sat back and said, wow, great. Which of my many strategies did you implement? I said, oh, none of those at all. I just learned to count to 10. So, sometimes the strategies can be simple, I think. Sometimes they can be straightforward. They don't need to be complicated. And maybe just the reflection, that moment of pause and reflection might be a good thing.
Yeah. I don't want to cut off the conversation, but I do want to make a closing comment from my perception here.
Please.
I think that many of us spend our life thinking that there are goals that have to be met and there are benchmarks that have to be obtained, and there is a place that we're going. And I want to somehow get you to understand that the journey is the process, and that we will never arrive, and be comfortable with never arriving. Celebrate growth and celebrate new insights each day, and celebrate that the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. Celebrate that. Don't be upset by it. Embrace change and embrace new opportunities. Embrace the journey. Quit looking for the goblet at the end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ron. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for being here. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. We now see that we have the option to not be puppets. We are emotional creatures. Emotions come before reasoning. Every decision is an emotional decision. And just the very awareness of that perhaps may be sufficient to allow us to refrain, to reflect, and then respond appropriately. So I've got a lot out of today's talk. I hope everybody else has. If you want any more information about this, if you want connections, if you're not quite sure where to go to get those papers that Dr. Ron referred to earlier, Sarah's put up her and my contact details. Please feel free to contact us, and we will direct you as appropriate. So that's it. It was great.
One last comment. I hope that this is recorded, and I hope people share it. You know, the only way that we form a community is by expanding the community. And so if you have access to this in some way through you guys, I would like this to be shared with the world. I want people to see this, because each of us need to start understanding how decisions are made, the role of emotions. And please, you know, if you can get somebody to watch this for an hour, have them do it.
Yeah, great. Listen, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed it. Sorry we kept you all on mute and the video's off, but it was the only way to do it. So Sarah, thank you very much for co-hosting with me. Ron, Dr. Ron, I really appreciate you being here today. I know it's early in the morning over in Arizona. So thank you very, very much for the presentation. And I look forward to talking to you all again in the not too distant future.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Ron. Thank you.
Bye-bye.